Good day and welcome back to another Dbz Dokkan video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the performance of Goku in the, physical God Goku in the red zone versus Broly. So obviously we're going to take a look at how good he does, but he's got a pretty good team. His leader skill is very generic. So you can pair him up with pretty much anyone, which is good. It's obviously a good thing, you know. Him being able to have, this kind of level of viability in his team selection, being a pure Saiyans or a hybrid Saiyans team, I think for the most part is a good thing. I don't want to kind of like harp on or knock generic leader skills. They can sometimes be a bit lackluster as well because they're a bit broad, but I think his coverage is good. Exploding Rage is also decently covered. I think Exploding Rage is decently covered. I think he's also under decent coverage, and you can get a good amount of units and creatures and all sorts of units underneath these. So I think overall they're in a good space. I do think, as kind of like a team, I think he's obviously got decent linkage as well, so I think overall he sits in a very solid position, with obviously accepting the fact that he does obviously himself maybe not have the widest spectrum of link partners, but Goku's very good. Obviously he's got the ability to guard, he's got the ability to do significant damage, he's got stacking, attack and defense, he's got evasion, he's got all the nice things that make units great in red zone, and that's very apparent from the get-go. He's very good. Obviously you need to have all superclass if you want to activate his full passive. This is not a huge issue. Getting a full superclass team is really not that major a problem, and I found getting these 6 orbs honestly not too hard as well. Now I was using 2 rainbow orb changes, and this did make things easier, but 2 of them are also very good units for this event anyway. Kid Goku's very good for this event, and yeah, in general I think everyone was pretty solid in this event. So I think overall, if you are a player who's interested in using Goku, then you can definitely see some good utilization out of him. He's got a lot going on. I think he's in a very solid space, if I was to say, as a unit, and his team is strong. So on those premises, I think he sits in a very good sphere in terms of this kind of team and build and functionality and everything. But yeah, beyond that, I think his final or his transformed state is a useful condition, but obviously has somewhat of its limits. I think everyone understands it's more a finishing transformation than anything else. So if you are someone that's interested in using him, it's definitely more for damage at the end, more so than anything else. One big thing with Goku will be the AoE Broly phase. So Goku can tank that pretty well. I think that's fairly apparent as long as you get his guard. Remember, Broly deactivates evasion, which is why it's interesting to see how Goku will do without that aspect of his kit. That being said, he does more than fine. Especially if you get these 6 orbs, he does fine. Against these strength phases, obviously if you don't get the 6 orbs, you do have to be a bit concerned about catching a super attack, but if you get the 6 orbs, you can get hit by super attacks and it actually doesn't matter. So Goku's that good that he, as long as you get everything kind of right for him, then he can do everything really, really well. So I personally think he's in a good space from that perspective, and I think in general he's looking really quite solid as a unit. Of course, everyone's got their own kind of ideas on consistency of the 6 orbs. I personally think he's in a pretty consistent state. I do think he's got some issues getting them, especially if you don't get his orb changing, but if you give him 1 or 2 orb changes or a rainbow orb creator, then I don't tend to find him having issues getting his 6 orbs. Of course, you can have issues with him getting his 6 orbs. As with anything, you can always have issues getting 6 orbs or performing to the best of your capabilities. But I think you also need to understand that there is some kind of mechanism and control and levels of control to the situation that makes things functional and viable and yeah, just in general pretty decent. So yeah, obviously beyond that, I would say things are in a good spot for Goku. He's a good unit. He doesn't need a lot to function. He doesn't need like a huge amount of catering to. Just those orbs maybe make some kind of work. But beyond that, he's fine. Damage could be a little bit low because, especially if you're building him into additionals, his base form doesn't really have a huge amount of damage present within it. At least I don't think so. It's not got like a huge amount of damage present within it. So you do have to factor that in, but I think beyond that, there's not too much else that I would mention being too imperative. If you take a look here, he does more than fine tanking a super with no items from good old Broly. He obviously gets quite a few super attacks beforehand, which helps him, but yeah, as long as you get 6 orbs, he's fine. If you don't get 6 orbs, he will take damage, but that's about it. In terms of damage, once you get him to Super Saiyan form, look, I think he does well. I think he sits in a good space in that regard. Obviously, it can be a bit lackluster depending on how you think he's supposed to do or what's supposed to happen or things like that. I think obviously it's always a bit of a concern when you're looking at units like this on what happens if I don't do this, or what happens if I do that. But generally speaking, I think Goku's in a really solid place as a unit. I have no real issues or complaints with them. I think they did a great job. One other thing I will say, at least when it comes to Goku, is just that there is kind of like this difficulty with linking him. So obviously he retains prepared for battle. So when you're thinking of Goku, don't really be too concerned about his links. Like, yes, it would help to have all the very, very, very good links kind of active. But honestly, this is not a huge train smash, realistically speaking. Like, I just don't see it being a big issue with Goku. He can do a lot of stuff, just as a unit himself. And, even without the major links active, Goku does more than fine. Like, he really does do more than fine. Overall, I just find him to be a really, really, really solid unit. Again, it is one thing I will say, probably best if you consider, just focusing on him in his base form. Transforming him, especially in Broly, is not great. In other red zones, it's probably fine to transform him or do these sort of things, because he can then, in those scenarios, do quite a lot as a unit. He can do quite a bit of really good capabilities in those situations because he still has his evasion, whereas unfortunately in this situation, he can't really do much more due to the fact that he doesn't have his evasion active, because Broly obviously deactivates it. So you do need to be a little bit aware of that. You're not going to be able to out evade or do anything like that against Broly, and that's of course a problem. So yeah, just be aware of that when you are using him, specifically in the Broly event. But in other red zones, I think it's probably best to transform, especially when you get later on and you want to kind of finish off the opposition. I think it's fine to transform him. I don't think there's like a huge prevalence to not transforming him or anything like that. I think in general, I would consider transforming him at the very least. I think you'll probably have a good time and you won't be so out of luck when it comes to his damage. And I think he's good in that in that regard. Like, you're gonna have situations, of course, where he ends up having a couple problems, or maybe having a few damage issues, especially later on. You want those crits, you want the ability to finish off the enemy, and that's good. That's really good from Goku's side, especially when he transforms. So I would just say, yeah, obviously keep an eye out on that. But overall, Goku does great. and he does really well the whole way through, and I was very impressed with him. That's it from me. Bye.